Beloved, lift your eyes above the noise, above the lack, above every system that tried to convince you that not enough is your portion. Today we ascend not just in thought, but in spirit, because Psalm 121 is not a whisper, it is a divine announcement that your help does not come from limitation, it comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. I speak to every hidden agreement with scarcity, every mindset of barely surviving, every cycle of drought, every inherited narrative of this is as far as you go. Today we interrupt that script. We revoke the contract fear tried to sign over your future. As we journey through Psalm 121, let this word become a mirror and a mantle. A mirror that reveals where your eyes have been fixed, and a mantle that repositions you under supernatural provision. Because the one who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, and the same keeper is watching over you. So lean in, open your heart, and prepare for a divine reset, because this is not just a psalm you read, this is a Psalm 121 that breaks agreements with scarcity. Lift your eyes above lack, because what you focus on becomes the atmosphere you live in. Many people have mastered the language of limitation without realizing it, repeating narratives shaped by past disappointments, inherited fears, and systems that trained them to expect just enough to survive, but never enough to thrive. When the psalmist declared, "I lift up my eyes to the hills," it was not poetry alone, it was a deliberate redirection of attention away from visible shortages toward an invisible source. Lack loses authority when your perspective changes. Scarcity often survives not because it is powerful, but because it is familiar. And familiarity can disguise itself as truth. The moment your gaze rises, you begin to detach from environments that taught you to measure your worth by what you do not have. There is a posture of the spirit that refuses to bow to insufficiency. It is not denial of reality, it is alignment with a higher reality. You may see bills, obstacles, closed doors, or seasons that felt dry. But lifting your eyes shifts the reference point from circumstance to covenant. When your eyes remain fixed on the ground, every obstacle looks like a mountain. When your eyes rise, even mountains become reminders that help is higher than terrain. Scarcity whispers that resources are finite, that opportunity is rare, and that provision must be hoarded. Yet the language of Psalm 121 speaks of a keeper whose supply is not limited by human systems. To lift your eyes is to interrupt internal agreements that normalized "not enough" as a permanent identity. Many people unknowingly build altars to lack through repeated focus on what is missing. Words like "I can't," "I don't have," or "maybe someday" become seeds planted in the soil of expectation. But when you lift your eyes, you reprogram the inner dialogue that governs decisions. You begin to speak from promise instead of pressure. Your help comes from the Lord, which means provision is not merely transactional, it is relational. The psalmist's declaration dismantles the illusion that help must come from the same place where problems originated. Your history may show cycles of limitation, but your help is not bound to history. Raising your eyes is an act of spiritual resistance against patterns that tried to confine your imagination. Lack often disguises itself as humility, convincing you that dreaming beyond survival is prideful. Yet lifting your eyes is an invitation to see yourself from heaven's perspective. It is the refusal to define your future by the most recent disappointment. When your eyes are low, you calculate possibilities based on visible evidence. When your eyes are lifted, you begin to perceive unseen resources. Faith does not ignore facts, but it refuses to let facts dictate destiny. The hills in Psalm 121 symbolize a vantage point, a reminder that elevation changes interpretation. What looked overwhelming at ground level becomes manageable when seen from above. Your perspective determines whether challenges appear as threats or as platforms for divine intervention. There is also a discipline in lifting your eyes daily because scarcity is persistent. It returns through comparison. through fear of tomorrow, through memories of seasons when doors remained closed. Each time you raise your gaze, you declare independence from those narratives. You remind your soul that the keeper neither slumbers nor sleeps, meaning provision does not depend on your constant striving. Many people exhaust themselves trying to secure what only alignment can release. Lifting your eyes is not passive, it is an intentional repositioning that changes how you respond to opportunities, how you steward resources, and how you interpret delays. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is heaven revealing through this moment?" Scarcity thrives where vision is narrow. When your eyes remain fixed on a single outcome, any deviation feels like loss, but lifted eyes reveal multiple pathways for provision. You begin to recognize that divine help is creative, often arriving in forms you did not anticipate. The psalmist did not say help comes from the hills themselves, but from the maker of heaven and earth, indicating that creation is not the source, the creator is. This distinction frees you from idolizing specific people, jobs, or opportunities as the only channels of blessing. When one door closes, lifted eyes search for the hand that opens another. Instead of mourning the absence of what you expected, you become attentive to the presence of what is emerging. To lift your eyes is also to reclaim authority over internal narratives shaped by fear. Fear trains you to look downward, to anticipate failure, to rehearse worst-case scenarios until they feel inevitable. But Psalm 121 invites you into a different rhythm, one where expectation is rooted in divine watchfulness. The keeper's vigilance means you are not navigating life alone. Even when circumstances suggest isolation, as your eyes rise, you begin to notice subtle signs of provision that were previously overlooked, moments of favor, unexpected connections, ideas that arrive with clarity, strength that meets you at the edge of exhaustion. Scarcity loses its grip when gratitude replaces anxiety as the dominant lens. There is a transformative power in vision because what you behold shapes what you become. When you constantly observe lack, you unconsciously mirror its limitations in your decisions. You hesitate to invest, to give, to create, because you assume there will never be enough. But lifted eyes cultivate a generosity that flows from trust rather than surplus. You begin to understand that provision is not always about accumulation, sometimes it is about circulation. The keeper's role is not only to protect but to guide, ensuring that your steps align with purpose. Each time you choose to look up instead of inward at fear, you reinforce a mindset that attracts possibility rather than restriction. Lifting your eyes also confronts inherited beliefs about scarcity that may have traveled through generations. Perhaps you grew up hearing that success is rare, that abundance belongs to others, that struggle is the natural state of life. Those narratives can embed themselves deeply, influencing how you interpret every opportunity. Yet Psalm 121 introduces a new lineage, one defined by divine oversight rather than human limitation. When you raise your gaze, you break allegiance with old scripts and step into a different inheritance. You begin to see yourself not as a product of scarcity, but as a participant in divine provision. This shift changes how you approach work, relationships, and creativity because you are no longer operating from survival mode. As your eyes lift, you also become aware of the spiritual dimension of perspective. There is a battle over where your attention rests, because attention directs energy. Scarcity competes for your focus through constant reminders of what is lacking, but the psalmist's declaration acts like a compass, guiding your attention toward the source of help. This does not eliminate challenges, it reframes them. Obstacles become invitations to witness provision in motion. Instead of shrinking under pressure, you begin to expand your capacity to believe. You learn to pause before reacting, to ask what heaven is revealing rather than what fear is predicting. Lifting your eyes is not a one-time event, it is a rhythm of living. Each morning presents a choice between rehearsing yesterday's limitations and anticipating today's possibilities. The psalmist models a conscious decision to direct attention upward, reminding us that perspective is a form of stewardship. When you steward your vision, you protect your hope from erosion, even in seasons where external evidence seems unchanged. Lifted eyes sustain an inner confidence that refuses to collapse. This confidence is not rooted in personal strength, but in the awareness of a keeper who governs outcomes beyond your control. There is also a prophetic dimension to lifted vision. When you look above lack, you begin to speak differently, pray differently, and expect differently. Words shift from complaint to declaration, from fear to faith. Your environment may not immediately reflect abundance, but your internal atmosphere starts to transform. You become less reactive to temporary shortages and more responsive to divine direction. Opportunities that once seemed intimidating begin to appear accessible, not because circumstances changed overnight, but because your perception evolved. The act of lifting your eyes becomes a declaration that scarcity does not have the final authority over your story. In moments when fatigue tries to lower your gaze again, remember that lifting your eyes is an act of alignment rather than effort alone. It is a return to the truth that help originates from a higher realm, one not limited by economic cycles, human approval, or past failures. Each upward glance reinforces your connection to that source, strengthening resilience in the face of uncertainty. As your vision rises, you begin to notice how provision often follows clarity. Decisions become sharper, priorities align, and distractions lose their influence. Scarcity loses its voice when your attention is anchored in the presence of the keeper who watches over every step, every transition, every unseen movement, shaping your path forward through seasons that once defined by lack and earns to remain elevated above the narratives that try to anchor you to the ground and keep your expectations confined to what has already been seen or experienced instead of what is being prepared beyond the horizon. Your current understanding and awareness in ways continually invite you to look high, looking, and then when words may, when see. Believe deep. Your assumption as your perspective continues to rise, be reminded of your shapes to rise beyond the boundaries that once defined the limits of your expectation, reshapes how you interpret every moment of a life learned to live around before of rock rather than with is not is a shape when it came to the real noise. But then I'm going or in the rack and the kind of everyone is a good human journey to go to the we want to ride and we so many boys and everyone will like the home. Cancel every agreement with scarcity, because not every contract is written on paper. Some are etched into thought patterns, spoken through repeated words, and reinforced through silent expectations that life will always feel restricted. Agreements with scarcity often begin subtly, formed in moments of disappointment when the heart quietly decides to expect less in order to avoid pain. Over time, those decisions evolve into internal vows that shape perception, guiding how opportunities are evaluated and how risks are approached. The psalmist's declaration of help from the Lord invites a deeper examination of what has been unconsciously accepted as normal. When you decide to cancel an agreement with scarcity, you are not denying past seasons of limitation. You are refusing to allow them to define the boundaries of your future. Scarcity thrives where resignation has settled in, where the mind begins to rehearse narratives of impossibility until they sound like wisdom. Agreements can hide behind phrases that appear practical, such as, "This is just how life is," or "People like me never reach that level." These statements feel safe because they protect against disappointment, yet they also reinforce confinement. Canceling an agreement requires awareness, the willingness to recognize where belief has aligned more with fear than with faith. Psalm 121 speaks of a keeper who watches continually, which means divine help is not limited by the expectations you inherited. Breaking an agreement with scarcity begins when you acknowledge that limitation is not your identity, but a temporary condition that can be confronted and dismantled. There is a spiritual dimension to agreements because what you repeatedly agree with gains influence over your emotional landscape. If you consistently affirm lack, your decisions will unconsciously align with that narrative. You may decline opportunities, hesitate to invest in growth, or shrink your vision to match past experiences. Canceling an agreement is an act of authority, a declaration that the voice of scarcity no longer has permission to dictate your direction. This process is not merely intellectual. It requires emotional release from the fear that once made limitation feel necessary. You begin to recognize that divine provision operates beyond predictable systems, often appearing where human logic expects absence. Agreements with scarcity can also be inherited through cultural narratives, family experiences, or societal pressures that emphasize survival over abundance. These narratives shape how success is perceived and what feels attainable. Perhaps you were taught to expect struggle as a permanent companion, to see provision as rare rather than consistent. When you cancel such agreements, you are not rejecting your history, you are redefining your relationship with it. You honor the resilience that carried you through previous seasons while refusing to let those seasons determine your ceiling. The psalmist's focus on the maker of heaven and earth reminds you that divine help is not constrained by generational patterns. What was once considered impossible within your environment can become accessible when you release allegiance to inherited limitations. Canceling an agreement often begins with language. Words carry creative power, shaping the atmosphere of expectation around you. When you shift from statements of defeat to declarations of trust, you begin to rewrite internal scripts. Instead of saying, "I never have enough," you choose to affirm alignment with provision. This does not ignore challenges, it reframes them as temporary rather than permanent. As your language changes, your imagination expands, allowing you to envision solutions where you once saw dead ends. The keeper described in Psalm 121 symbolizes consistency, a reminder that divine watchfulness is not dependent on fluctuating circumstances. This awareness strengthens your resolve to release agreements rooted in fear. There is also a process of healing attached to canceling scarcity agreements because many of them were formed during vulnerable moments. Perhaps a season of financial strain, emotional loss, or repeated rejection convinced you to lower expectations as a form of self-protection. While that response may have provided temporary relief, it also limited your capacity to receive new possibilities. Canceling the agreement means acknowledging the pain that shaped it while choosing not to let that pain dictate your future. You allow hope to re-enter spaces that once felt closed, trusting that the same keeper who guards your steps also restores your confidence. Scarcity agreements often influence how you perceive time, creating urgency rooted in fear rather than purpose. You may feel pressured to hold tightly to what you have, fearing that giving or investing will leave you empty. Yet the psalmist's declaration of constant watchfulness challenges that mindset, suggesting that provision is ongoing rather than occasional. Canceling an agreement with scarcity invites you into a rhythm of trust, where generosity flows not from surplus alone but from alignment with divine guidance. You begin to see resources as tools for impact rather than objects of anxiety. Each decision becomes an opportunity to reinforce your freedom from limitation. The process of cancellation also involves discernment, learning to recognize when thoughts originate from fear rather than truth. Scarcity often disguises itself as caution, urging you to remain small to avoid risk. While wisdom encourages thoughtful decisions, fear seeks to paralyze growth. By lifting your awareness toward the source of help, you develop the ability to distinguish between protective wisdom and restrictive belief. This clarity empowers you to step into opportunities with confidence, knowing that provision is not solely dependent on human calculation. The maker of heaven and earth is not limited by the variables that once defined your expectations. As you cancel agreements with scarcity, you may notice resistance arising from familiar habits. The mind tends to return to old patterns, especially when faced with uncertainty. In those moments, reaffirming your alignment with divine provision becomes essential. Each declaration of trust acts like a seed planted in new soil, gradually transforming the landscape of your thinking. You begin to approach challenges with creativity instead of anxiety, viewing obstacles as invitations for innovation rather than confirmations of lack. This shift does not eliminate effort. It aligns effort with hope, ensuring that your actions reflect possibility rather than fear. Relationships can also reveal hidden agreements with scarcity. You may find yourself comparing your journey to others, interpreting their success as evidence of your limitation. Comparison fuels scarcity by creating the illusion that there is not enough for everyone. Canceling the agreement means releasing the need to measure your worth against external benchmarks. Instead, you focus on the unique path unfolding before you, trusting that divine help operates with precision and intention. The Keeper's watchfulness ensures that your journey is not a competition, but a collaboration with purpose. As you embrace this perspective, envy loses its influence, replaced by gratitude for the distinct opportunities emerging in your life. Faith plays a central role in breaking scarcity agreements because it anchors your vision beyond visible evidence. You may not immediately see abundance, but you choose to believe in its possibility. This belief transforms how you interpret delays, viewing them as preparation rather than denial. The psalmist's confidence in divine help reflects a deep understanding that timing is part of provision. When you cancel agreements with scarcity, you release the pressure to control every outcome, allowing space for unexpected solutions to emerge. Trust becomes a guiding force, shaping your decisions and sustaining your resilience through uncertain seasons. Canceling an agreement with scarcity is also an act of reclaiming identity. Scarcity often attempts to define who you are, convincing you that limitation is intrinsic rather than circumstantial. By rejecting that narrative, you step into a new understanding of yourself as someone supported by divine watchfulness. This shift influences how you carry yourself, how you speak about your future, and how you engage with opportunities. Confidence grows not from external validation, but from the awareness that your help comes from a source greater than any obstacle. Each step forward reinforces your independence from old agreements, strengthening your commitment to a mindset rooted in provision. The journey of cancellation is ongoing, requiring continual awareness and intentional alignment. Each day presents moments where old beliefs attempt to resurface, urging you to return to familiar patterns of fear. Yet each declaration of trust strengthens your freedom, reminding you that scarcity does not hold ultimate authority over your life. As your perspective expands, you begin to notice how abundance manifests not only in material resources, but in creativity, relationships, and inner peace. These forms of provision reveal the multifaceted nature of divine help, encouraging you to remain attentive to subtle signs of growth. In this process, gratitude becomes a powerful tool, shifting your focus from what is absent to what is present. Gratitude does not ignore challenges, it acknowledges them while celebrating progress. By cultivating thankfulness, you reinforce your alignment with provision, weakening the influence of scarcity narratives. You begin to see how past obstacles shaped resilience, how moments of uncertainty revealed hidden strengths, and how divine watchfulness guided you even when you felt alone. Each reflection becomes a reminder that agreements with scarcity were never permanent, only temporary perspectives waiting to be transformed. Canceling every agreement with scarcity is ultimately about reclaiming authority over your attention and expectation. It is the decision to align your thoughts with the truth that help comes from beyond visible limitations. As you continue to release old narratives, your vision becomes clearer, your confidence stronger, and your actions more aligned with purpose. The Keeper's presence invites you into a lifestyle where provision is anticipated rather than doubted, where hope shapes decisions, and where faith becomes the foundation of you take forward into new seasons of growth and possibility. Continue unfolding with increasing clarity as you remain committed to breaking every silent contract that once tried to anchor your identity to lack and replacing it with a mindset that expects divine help to meet you in every space where a limitation once tried to define your story and reshape way and the way you pastoring and one sign of the 1% total and 180. That continually challenge old assumptions and invite you into a deeper awareness of provision flowing through moments that once felt restricted while your perspective keeps evolving beyond the boundaries that scarcity attempt to impose upon your imagination and your willingness main is belief in what understanding of what representation within every realm with stressors and confidence rooted in the awareness of holy how the confidence of growth and the ongoing transformation of how you see yourself moving through seasons that no longer hold the power to confine your sensation of provision when unfolding in ways that invite you to keep advancing with renewed clarity, turning to the limitations you once accept as permanent within the narrative of your growth. With increase of divine support guiding every step and of every decision beyond the reach of necessities for reach of scarcity's infamous moving forward in ways